Hello and welcome everyone to the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance's Crypto Roundup for Friday, January 17th, 2025. 2 weeks into the new year. Ron Quaranta here with my dear friend and co-host David Brill. Our roaming co-host Joshua Ashley Klayman is somewhere. We will figure it out. Hopefully she can join us. Before we begin, as usual, our usual disclaimers. Obviously, please keep in mind that nothing discusses any type of advice or investment advice or legal advice. And then everything that David and I and Josh would be talking about really are our own personal opinions and not necessarily the opinions of our respective firms. David, my friend, we're 2 weeks in. There's a lot to cover. Things are moving fast. I just want to kick it off with, holy cow, look at this market. And I feel like our last conversation last week was depressing. And now it's, oh my God, some of these things up double digits year to date. What are you seeing in the marketplace, David?
Look, I think we were really data dependent on the traditional TradFi market, and we got positive numbers. And again, as we've always talked about on the show, it's very hard to know if the numbers that we see are actually correct. I mean, it's what's reported. I don't want to bang the drum that ad nauseum that the numbers are hard to rely on and revisions are extreme on some months, but we got favorable numbers across the board. And then we got a favorable housing starts number today. Yeah. I mean, I'm not a housing expert, but that number just seems awfully high to me. But again, I think we may just see positive numbers as we see a change in president and wanting to leave on a high note. And again, that could be any administration. I'm not saying it's this one, but that's my sense. What are you seeing, Ron?
Well, it's interesting, David, when we see the data, and I know you and I go deep macro, and for everyone in the audience, thank you so much for joining. If you've got questions for David or I, please put them in the chat. Everyone on LinkedIn and X and YouTube, and we're posting these on Spotify and soon Apple Podcasts. David, for me, we're so data dependent, but it's never really the data, and I've said it 1,000 times, it's the revisions. So it's fascinating because after our last conversations, we saw numbers that really made the entirety of the street say, well, there go the interest rate cuts. Used to be 5, now it's 2, maybe 1. Things are terrible. And it's interesting because things are terrible because people in the data were getting jobs. So it's just such a weird dichotomy to see. And then, of course, a few days later, CPI comes in at a slower growth number than everyone expected. And it's like happy days are here again and the market grows through the roof. It's just interesting to see how quickly markets react to data that A, can be revised, and B, is so sometimes contradictory. Joshua Ashley Klayman, welcome to the show. Good to see you, dear friend. I hope you can hear us.
Thank you. Yes, I can hear you. I was struggling to get off of mute. Yes, apologies. I was struggling to get out from under some work.
No worries. And by the way, Emma has already commented that I said Josh is somewhere. That is true. There's not a where's Waldo, Emma. It's where's Josh in my life, just to let everyone know. Josh, we kicked it off with kind of the economics conversation. I want to start going down that road a little bit, David. When we talk about a new administration coming up and we see, there's this kind of euphoria of things are going to be amazing. And that's warranted in many ways, but there are still things that need to be fixed. There's still things that need to be defined. David, in the green room, you mentioned some of the classification issues that you and I and Josh know about. What are your concerns about that in a new incoming administration?
Well, I think we in the WSBA had a really fruitful meeting the other day about what we thought legislative priorities should be for 2025 and how we can help move those forward. And one of the things I was talking about was classification issues and tax issues, and that I really want to see the de minimis consumption, either, a level where you're not taxed on, or some sort of, structure where maybe if it's used for consumption up to $600, maybe up to $3,000 to $5,000 for consumptive use where you're not having a taxable event, because that will really help seeing the use of Bitcoin as a currency, not as only as a store of value. And I think the other one that really, I think important for crypto in general is that right now all crypto transactions over $10,000 have to be reported. And I think that number should go up. And I also think that the number for BSA AML should go up, and based on inflation at the very least. But I would like to see that number go up to somewhere around 50,000.
Yeah.
Because I think at this point now, with the Bitcoin moving, and I just sort of on my left saw that we passed 105,000, that that becomes like a lot of reporting and a lot of customer information being reported for smaller transactions. So I think that is another thing on my wish list on classification that I'd like to see for 2025.
Josh, weigh in on this. And, the three of us have had this conversation with so many members of the WSBA. For years, it's been tough environment in the US, SEC is terrible, taxes are confusing. And now that, the quote unquote clouds are parting, we're running into some of the stuff that David's alluding to, which is, what is that de minimis? Why does the IRS call it property? And that makes things much more difficult versus what is a commodity versus what is a security? And the work we're trying to do really defines how the marketplace responds to a pro crypto administration. Do you see it the same way? Are we missing some of the challenges?
Oh.
I left her speechless again.
I see it the same way. I mean, I agree. And I really do think, though, notwithstanding the challenges that exist, I mean, I've been hearing from folks where, they're considering major acquisitions because the U.S. market, which is a very important market, has been somewhat untouchable for a while. It's been out of bounds. And, sometimes we would advise folks, possibly best to avoid the U.S., and U.S. customers due to uncertainty and for other reasons. And so I think now folks are contemplating, hey, look, I want to get into this market. Maybe I don't necessarily want to start from the very beginning. What's out there in terms of a joint venture partner or an acquisition target or things like that? And it's an exciting time.
Yeah. Josh, David, and that's a really good point, Josh, because it's not the builders have to build from scratch anymore. It's there's dry powder waiting on the sides. Let's jumpstart the innovation in the marketplace and buy into what might exist. David, one of the things that also came out in the news recently, and I'd love your perspectives, both of you, coming out of the transition team's information is the note that crypto will be declared a national priority. So I'm going to, for a dummy like me, David, what does that mean? Because I think there are so many moving parts to this, and I feel like it's a little bit of marketing jazz. But do you see it the same way?
Well, look, I think, the way I like to think about it is sort of the inverse of what the Biden first day and sort of 100-day executive orders were when it came to crypto. When, he wanted an evaluation of crypto, and his administration evaluate crypto across the different administrative offices. I view this potential executive order by Trump as sort of the 180-degree opposite of making it a priority and seeing how the U.S. can make it a more welcoming environment for crypto companies to do business. So that's how I kind of view it.
Josh, do you see it the same way?
I do. I mean, no surprise there. I keep pressing mute, but perhaps I should stay off of mute.
The interesting aspect of that, David, Josh, I don't know if you watch it. I try to watch some of the senatorial candidate kind of committee hearings, which is painful in many different ways. But some of the things that we continue to hear about, and we'll have a conversation about it in one of our policy updates, is strategic Bitcoin reserve, David, for example, or Josh, we've heard about, looking at repeal of things like SAB 121. Even the Treasury Secretary designee, Scott Bessent had noted that he doesn't see the need for example, a U.S. CBDC. Those are pretty broad statements and commentaries, David. Do you see a future where there's a Bitcoin strategic reserve? We talk about it this week at our crypto asset working group, but what's the use case?
So I do see one at some point. I think it's the same idea of having a strategic reserve for gold and having diversifying some of the assets of the Treasury. Not totally sold yet on the idea of holding it as a strategic reserve, but I do like the idea that I know the Treasury has some confiscated Bitcoin that they have from Silk Road, and I do like the idea of holding on to that as maybe part of the strategic reserve for our country. Look, I'm open to having more dialogue about it, but that's sort of my first take on it.
Josh, commensurate with what David's talking about, you probably saw the news as well. I believe it was Senator Lummis, someone correct me if I'm wrong,
You're
who
right.
commented about the Department of Justice having something like 70,000 Bitcoin, almost WTF, what are you doing with this? And this is kind of making people lose money. What were your thoughts when you saw that really kind of proactive, hey, government, what are you doing with this Bitcoin? Do you agree with her perspective?
So I think, Ron, what you're talking about is her comment about why are you planning to sell these
Correct. Yes.
Bitcoin? Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important that we have a strategy, right? If
Right.
one part of government is planning to do a massive sale, while it's been teased or floated or, dare I say, I don't want to say promised, but vowed, or, that we would have a strategic Bitcoin reserve. I mean, these two things seem to be pulling in a different direction, right? And so I do think it's important just to sort of put a spotlight on it to say what's going on here so all parties are aware. Because, we're going to have an inauguration very soon.
Yeah.
If the goal is to have a strategic Bitcoin reserve, then, maybe that doesn't mean selling off massive amounts of Bitcoin.
David, let me go cynical on this to follow up on what Josh is stating. The DOJ has 72 hours to kind of pull the plug. Do you envision a DOJ dump of 70,000 Bitcoin on the market?
I mean, first of all, just from like getting money for the treasury and for our country, I think that would be a very unwise idea just from a market standpoint and getting the best price for your holdings. Look, could they sell more in the next 72 hours? I mean, I'm not apprised of their selling schedule, but I could certainly see them selling another tranche. But no, it really wouldn't make sense from a markets and getting the most value from the Bitcoin they have for them to do that. So could I see one more tranche being sold? Yes. You have to remember they act separately. What the Department of Justice is doing and its mandate is different than what current President Biden's sort of view on crypto is, but they work sort of separately. So I would imagine when President-elect Trump gets inaugurated on Monday, and if he does make a proclamation about an executive order for making Bitcoin a strategic priority, or a priority for this administration, they might think twice about immediately selling these and sort of wait for some guidance. But I could definitely see them selling some more before the inauguration.
Go ahead, Josh.
One thing I would mention, and this goes to David's point about maybe it not being the best idea, even if they were determined to sell it all at once, maybe not being the best value. I mean, we can remember back to Mt. Gox, right? And where you can actually see the trustee selling out on exchange because they had to sell in a public market at the time, right?
Right.
At least that's my understanding. And you could see it moving the market, right? So for those listening at home who aren't aware, if you try and sell a massive amount at once,
downward pressure
on an exchange or on exchange, it's going to have downward pressure on the price.
Yeah. Josh, really good point. Appreciate it. Let me stick with you, Josh, because it's interesting as we have this conversation. The gears of regulators, are still turning. There are a couple of important cases we might have alluded to previously, but there was a kind of I'll call it a partial win. I keep seeing the news articles of Coinbase wins big in court. I think it was a bit more nuanced than that. Josh, do you want to talk about that a little bit? We certainly need to also address the Ripple appeal, which is interesting. But can you tell the audience a little bit about the Coinbase matter?
Sure. And I believe that the one you're talking about is Coinbase's suit against the SEC.
Correct.
Because we
I should be more clear because
yeah,
everything I'm saying is not clear. I'm sorry, Josh.
No worries. I just want to make sure I'm answering the right way. So you may have seen, Coinbase had brought suit against the SEC in the Third Circuit, right? And this had to do with the SEC's denial of Coinbase's petition for rulemaking, which would, was a request that the SEC provide rulemaking to show how securities laws apply to digital assets, market participants, et cetera. It was pretty extensive.
Yeah.
And you may recall that the SEC responded with a pretty cursory no, thank you. We have other priorities, right? And so this lawsuit dealt with that. And what the Third Circuit said was that the SEC had acted arbitrarily and capriciously in respect of its denial of the petition for rulemaking. Now, they didn't go so far as to say that the SEC must engage in rulemaking specific to digital assets and the application of the securities laws. But what they did say is that the SEC's denial, in the way that it did, this cursory denial and talking about different priorities without explaining what those priorities are, why they're important, things like that, that was a violation of the Administrative Procedures Act. It was pretty scathing, in terms of of language for the Third Circuit to have against the SEC. But again, it didn't go so far as to mandate that rulemaking occur.
Josh, to that point, and David, weigh in on this as well. In the wake of that kind of circuit court decision, is there a chance under a new regime at the SEC that the SEC Commission says, just let's pull this suit? Again, I keep going back, Josh, to the mechanics of how regulators operate and the idea that just pulling the plug across multiple suits probably isn't what's going to happen. But it'd be interesting to see how a new administration approaches that. Thoughts?
Yeah, I'm happy to weigh in. Look, I think that one of the biggest challenges has been not only did we not have rulemaking, but we sort of had a bit of hiding the ball in the last 4 years, and people couldn't get clarity, so they could be in compliance. And I think it's ironic, but I think that this opinion sort of put a big dot on the I at the end of this term of the Chairman Gensler's time at the SEC. So I do think we'll see rulemaking, and I do think that based on the comments that have been made in a Reuters article that we referred to previously,
right,
that I think there is going to be some time taken to really review all the cases that have been active cases that are non-fraud cases against parties in the space, and really be thoughtful about where does rulemaking come in? Are these cases really the best use of the SEC's resources?
Right.
And maybe I think one thing that could come out of this, and this is a conversation I had with Jason Gottlieb, was maybe that there are settlements in these cases, and within these settlements there are things agreed upon to enact moving forward by the defendants in these cases, whether it be consumer protection or whatever it may be. That could be part of the settlement, so it's agreed upon by the parties. And we weren't talking about any particular case in particular, but just sort of broadly speaking. So I do think this is the sea change that we'll see, and I think we all expect a sort of different tack going forward.
David, Josh, thank you both. I just want to hit some comments. Emma Channing, yay, Josh is here. I realized from the few minutes ago. David and I will not take that personally, but it's not a show without Josh. Emma, you're absolutely right. And George, yes, we will absolutely be starting our events in New York City. Some of the evening events that we're looking at, the next one's going to be focused on stablecoins, but do stay tuned. Follow us on LinkedIn. Certainly reach out, info@WSBA.co as well. David, Josh, one of the conversations I had earlier this week with a colleague in the space that we all know was the idea that a really big catalyst for really launching crypto innovation in the country is the repeal of SAB 121, or at least the potential repeal of SAB 121. And the logic there was that there are many publicly traded companies and many large custodians that are very eager, holding dry powder, David, to get deeply involved in the space. Is that an easier, quick win? Josh, David, what are your thoughts?
I definitely have thoughts, but go ahead, Josh.
I mean, I think it would be a quick win. I mean, parties were agreed on this.
Right, both parties, yes.
Yeah, I mean, people sometimes say, oh, we've never had any legislation passed, any major legislation passed with respect to crypto, but it's not actually true, right? I'm reminded by some that actually Congress did pass, a repeal of SAB 121. It was just vetoed. So, yeah. But let me defer to David for his thoughts.
No, I agree. I don't think after in a bipartisan way that it was vetoed, and and why I should say this. I'm not sure why the Biden administration vetoed, the bill. And so I think on a bipartisan manner, I think this could be a good win for everybody, having it repealed. And so I think that's something, I think it could be a quick win. And I think it's something that, the majority of, Congress is aligned on. So I think, like you said, Josh, we want more custodians in the space. We want more, we don't want centralized points of failure, and we really need more custodians in the space. So, it's my hope that, it gets repealed and that, mark to market, prevails as sort of the accounting standard.
David and Josh, Emma going to obviously the most important topic for the WSBA and personally for Ron Q. Is there a steak dinner update? I believe David is taking the Bombardier jet into New York the week of the 26th. We will be scheduling a dinner. Josh, I will reach out to your team and find out if you're available. But yes, Emma, I owe David and Josh a steak dinner. Thank you for reminding me about that painful wager. I really do deeply appreciate it. And ETH Denver is coming up. There's Emma's throwing a party on February 27th. I will not be there, but Emma, with your permission, we'll circulate that through the WSBA membership. I know several folks are going as well. David, Josh, we've got a policy update coming up in the next several days. We're trying to get through the inauguration and arguably the chaos about what will happen in the next few days of a new administration. Josh, I'd love to go back to something else that happened in the courts as well. And you're always really spot on with has anyone heard about an update on the potential Ripple appeal? And then, of course, late in the day, there's a lovely drop that, yes, indeed, the SEC did appeal in the Ripple case. Can you bring the audience up to speed and dummies like me up to speed on what the appeal means? And again, through the lens of a new administration, does something like that simply go away?
So with the caveat, as always, that I'm not a litigator.
Yep.
I think as many may know, a while ago now, Judge Torres in the Southern District of New York decided the Ripple case, the SEC v. Ripple case. And in that case, she sort of split the baby, right? She said that sales to institutions, institutional sales, right, in connection with the fundraising directly from Ripple, for example, involved sales of securities, but that programmatic blind bid asks, for example, sales of XRP on exchange, did not involve sales of securities. Now, she did have an asterisk or some sort of footnote saying, I'm not touching secondary sales because they're not an issue here, but you can sort of extend the logic a bit at your own peril, but still. And then also certain other types of transactions did not involve sales, offers or sales of securities. So in that sense, it has been considered a very pro crypto decision relative to how that case could have turned out. And we also, I'll just tie this in for a moment. We also just saw about a week ago, maybe a little bit more now, that Judge Fela in the SEC v. Coinbase case granted Coinbase leave for an interlocutory appeal, so an appeal in the middle of the case, to the Second Circuit in respect of the application of the Howey test, like how the Howey test should apply to digital assets, right? Which Judge Fela had said was a controlling question of law, and also one that was, I don't remember the exact terms, but it was something like there were substantial grounds for disagreement in the interpretation thereof. And she pointed to the Ripple decision by Judge Torres and also the SEC v. Do Kwon Terraform Labs decision by Judge Rakoff. So basically, we were all waiting for January 15th was the deadline to see whether the SEC would let the Ripple verdict stand or whether it would appeal it. Now, Gary Gensler has not yet stepped down, right? So many, including Emma, had predicted that, the SEC would in fact appeal. Many also had hoped that the SEC would not appeal for a variety of reasons. Now that the appeal, they have appealed, I think what will be interesting is, as you noted, Ron, what happens after the inauguration? Many in our space, including, Lewis Cohen and Sam Enzer and others, have really been advocating for some sort of potential executive order or other action by Trump early in the administration to potentially, look at the dockets and see, like, do we want to continue this? But notwithstanding that, and whether that happens, we do know that Paul Atkins has been, picked as a potential or as the successor subject to confirmation for Gary Gensler. And of course, he, or perhaps an acting SEC chair before that, may be able to appoint, I actually don't know if an acting chair can do this, so let's caveat that, would appoint a new director of enforcement who, as David Brill has reminded us in prior shows, would have potential discretion to look and consider whether to continue. But that being said, what do you guys think?
And David, keep in mind, we've got I apologies, everyone. We've got a super hard stop in about 4 minutes. David, weigh in for a few moments, and then we have to address Kieran's comments as well.
I think I'm going to put a pin in this one only because I want to make a few predictions going into the inauguration. But I will say this, that I do think really pausing these cases and really evaluating what the new SEC commissioner's stance is going to be, what the new division enforcement head's stance is going to be, and collectively coming up with a new approach. And then after a new approach is sort of, after they reach consensus, then looking at the cases that are existing right now and the Wells notices that are out there, and then applying their new approach to those cases. So I think that would be a really thoughtful way of going about it. And, I think it would be productive for all
David,
sides.
Josh, thanks so much. Kieran puts out a comment, really important. Could the SEC and CFTC collaborate to create a new comprehensive regulatory framework? Washington being Washington, I don't see a new framework imminently, but there is work around bicameral working groups within the Congress that might empower and enact. And Kieran's comment, are there other organizations? I'm assuming you're talking about industry organizations, Kieran. I could be wrong, but certainly there are other associations having this conversation in DC. Along with the WSBA, we will be visiting Washington in later in March and potentially early April as well with our proposals or thoughts. We're not lobbyists, as everyone knows, but certainly that voice of industry is critically important as well. David and Josh, we've only got a couple of minutes, and I felt David, as he mentioned it, needing to make predictions. The wager aspect is in the air. I'm not going to fall for it, but David, let's get your predictions first.
So my prediction is that we will have an all-time high in Bitcoin, either on the inauguration day or right around there. And part of President Trump's remarks at some point, President-elect Trump's remarks, that he will, proudly proclaim that he is part of the reason why Bitcoin's at an all-time high. So that is my prediction for either over the weekend or early
Josh,
next week.
predictions?
Oh, wow. I don't like predictions. I am going to hold off from having any predictions right now, including because my brain is slightly fried. But I'm looking forward to next week.
Next week we'll be busy, and I will make one prediction, David. If the all-time high is 125, Ron will cry in a corner someplace in his home office and leave it there. We're going to have to leave it there, everyone. David, Josh, as always, it's such a privilege to be on the live stream broadcast with you. For everyone who's watching, thank you so much for your questions. If you've got additional questions for David or Josh or I, info@wsba.co. The video will live on YouTube. The audio will live on Spotify and soon Apple Podcasts as well. Mention it to your friends. We will be back next week. Josh, David, thank you so much.
Thank you, and have fun to everyone who's going to the crypto ball tonight.
Yes,
enjoy.
have a good time.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.